Muy buenas tardes. Thank you for coming, everyone. Better get rolling. So this is my talk, The Potential Role of Epigenetics and Ayahuasca Shamanism. So I just want to thank MAPS. I'm not university affiliated, but I am jungle affiliated, and I appreciate that MAPS is respecting my experience and giving me an opportunity to speak here, and I'd like to thank Bia again always for supporting me and helping me find opportunities to share my experience. It is a unique experience, but it involves a lot of time in a hut. I have the chance to work with the staff, live with the staff, work with our clients, live with our clients, and it's a different kind of experience. You learn a little bit of something else. Some of the treatment team, I just left as a business partner, but I'm still a consultant, and I still bring groups to Niwerao, Centro Espiritual, and like I said, this is the experience I gained living the better part of the last 6 years in that tambo right there. So I want to start with a quote from Jeremy Narby, who was a big inspiration to me. The anthropologist wrote The Cosmic Serpent. Intelligence in Nature, his subsequent book, he wrote, I began searching for common ground between indigenous knowledge and Western science, and ended up finding links between shamanism and molecular biology. In the book, The Cosmic Serpent, I presented the hypothesis that shamans take their consciousness down to the molecular level and gain access in their visions to information related to DNA, which they call animate essences or spirits. So that was kind of very interesting to me when I read that, and that's an example of Jeremy Narby sharing some an ayahuasca-inspired, information and knowledge with the world in his book. Well, so then I followed up, and Jeremy Narby inspired me to go to Peru and get involved, and yeah, I really got involved, and I ended up writing a book about it, kind of following up on my interest on his quote. And it's called Fellowship of the River, and it's available here. It's a book about the intersection between biology, emotion, and spirituality. So, getting on to the talk, I just want to touch on a few things that are brought up in the book. We're not going to be able to get through much, but just a touch. So it's the potential role of epigenetics and ayahuasca shamanism. So there's a few cases I'm going to bring up: migraine headache, PTSD, idiopathic chronic cough, somebody with this cough that's just not getting better, Crohn's disease, all of which responded to traditional Amazonian plant medicine and to Shipibo-style ayahuasca shamanism. So as a doctor, these look like 4 very different problems. I'm family medicine doctor, so if it's migraine headache, I might refer to the neurologist. If it's PTSD, I might refer to the psychiatrist. If it's chronic cough, they're going to go to the pulmonologist. If it's Crohn's, they're going to go to the gastroenterologist. Okay, but all these things are responding to the same treatment. These people all received a very similar treatment at our center. What physiology links these problems? What commonalities make such problems potential targets for this kind of medicine? So in the presented cases, the link is emotional trauma. Emotional trauma links all those cases. In those particular cases of those 4 diagnoses that I present, it was emotional trauma. In each case, their problem involved dysfunction in what I call the emotional body. Where is emotional trauma stored in the body, and how does this contribute to associated physical symptoms like migraine headaches or inflammation in your bowels? How does emotional healing, inspired by spiritually oriented techniques, ceremonial treatment, help to alleviate such problems, simultaneously generating physical change in the body? Okay? So PTSD is a big focus of MAPS. There's been a lot of gains with psychedelic medicine and PTSD. In the book, I describe Russ. He's at the time, he was several decades into PTSD from Vietnam. It's like 40 years. He's been through therapy. He's on psychiatric medication. He's tried all that stuff, all right? We're not against Western medicine. He did all that 40 years. Decided to try something different, went through a ceremonial healing process with plant medicine, and he had profound emotional healing, led to an increased capacity to cope with stress, which is one of these measures they're finding with these PTSD resolutions, improvements, both psychologically and physically. So I'm saying this healing happened in his emotional body. Where did this healing happen? So what is the emotional body? Well, it's the medium through which we experience emotion and feeling, number 1. Number 2, it's also, as a medical doctor, I'm trying to advance this idea, it is the physical apparatus connected to our experience of emotion and feeling in our bodies, namely this PNI network. Okay, that's the psychoneuroendocrine immunologic network that has been described in mind-body research. I'm going to touch on that a little bit, try to explain a little bit more. So here's the emotional body. The PNI network, this network includes the limbic brain, paralimbic structures, the autonomic nervous system, elements of the immune and endocrine systems. The HPA axis is a famous example, central to the emotional body, central to PTSD research, central to all this kind of treatment that we're talking about. It's a central component of the emotional body. So it is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that is referred to as the stress response system. Controls fight or flight response, controls cortisol levels, affects inflammation levels in the body. So PTSD in the emotional body. So I'm saying in PTSD, deep-seated emotional trauma lurks within and disturbs multiple elements of the emotional body, this PNI network, causing, for example, overwhelming fear and anxiety psychologically, an overactive fight or flight response in the nervous system, abnormal adrenaline and cortisol levels in the endocrine system, and out of control inflammation in the immune system, PNI network, the emotional body. So emotional healing through shamanic techniques and otherwise heals PTSD in part by improving the function of the HPA axis. Okay, there's physical measurements we can measure and show that this happens, and other elements within the emotional body. Some references for the YouTubers. So let's get on to another case. Migraine headache. So here's a case. Lisa, as described in the book, was a woman in her early 30s, debilitating migraines for years, worse with her menstrual cycle, needing triptan, medication sumatriptan, which is a tryptamine, just for the record, and really debilitated, unable to do anything during her problem with migraines. After 10-day treatment in the jungle with us, she had a dramatic improvement, and up to like a year with no significant headache, and then only minimal headache. And then she came back for a little more treatment down the line and had continued improvement. She did also have continued psychological support in that year off and was working through family relationships. It wasn't just that, but there was a major shift that happened, and then she worked with that shift and she continued to progress. What happened to her in ceremony? What happened to her? Well, what kinds of things were coming up with her and what I had seen with other people living with them, like I said, first time as a doctor, living with my patients, hanging out, having breakfast, whatever, shooting the breeze, and finding out that some of these migraine patients that I ran into, that a lot of them had been around a lot of excessive screaming and yelling and aggression as children, like overwhelmed stress response systems, overwhelmed sensory systems. You see this problem where now sensory integration is kind of crossed. All of a sudden a smell, it overwhelms the system, or a light overwhelms the system, or a sound overwhelms the system, or hormonal changes overwhelm this kind of fragile system. And in her case, she became very aware through the ceremonies and through the ayahuasca visions, in her case, that her father, who was a raging, kind of angry, screaming, throw stuff across the room, a lot of really disparaging comments in her direction, mixed in with very loving, very sweet, very confusing, so that his anger and also her anger about his anger, and the trauma of that anger and all the associated issues around that were a lot of what was coming up for her. One night, I don't remember, second, third night in her process, we had a ceremony, and she was coming back from the bathroom, and she had a little bit too much ayahuasca. Definitely something you have to be very careful about, dosing ayahuasca, and the book touches on the dangers and all the risks, and everybody should be very serious about that. In this case, it wasn't too serious. She was just a little bit too into it, to follow directions. So she was walking across the maloca, or ceremonial space, plops down in the middle and just boom, sits down, and that's it. And we can't really have that in the system because people are going to the bathroom, we're in the dark, it's like, okay, you can't sit there. So one of the helpers goes over and says, hey, can you get up, go back to your spot? She's like, you get the deep stare, like, whoa, And so then I go up, then I have to get up and go see what's going on. And I'm talking, hey, what's going on? And she can't respond. She can't respond verbally, that's where she's at. And so then there comes a point, and I'm training in there, that's a big part of what we're talking about in this moment is like, okay, the traditional side of things. Okay, that's what I'm trying to mix here, is the traditional side. And so I'm training in the plant medicine. I'm learning how to work with the plants in this Shipibo style in the Amazon, in the jungle. And we sing Icaros, we sing mystical healing songs to try to support the person and even try to perhaps, influence them energetically. In a beneficial way, medicinally trying to help them. So it's like, I can't beat them, join them. I'm going to sit here with her in the middle of the maloca, and what can we do, I know Ricardo and the gang, they're not going to get up, so just let's go. So I start singing to her, I start singing to Lisa, and just trying to, start out with just whatever I knew about her. First, you're trying to center her mind, center her senses, help her come back together, help her to deal with the effect, help her to relate to us. And then trying to, help her out from I know she has a headache problem, I know she has this problem with her dad and the anger, so I'm going after those issues. And then seeing what is revealed to me in that process, through the ayahuasca, this mysterious realms. And I see this chromatin is the DNA wrapped up in the protein packaging that is chromosomes. I see the chromatin, and it's pink, it's glowing pink, like beaded pink, and it's showing me this, like her DNA, but in the packaging. And then in the nooks and crannies between these beads and the little space between the molecules, there's these little channels and little, nooks and crannies. And I see this little black dragon swimming through there. This little black dragon is swimming through there. And the ayahuasca tells me, Joe, her problem isn't in her genes, her problem is on her genes. It's there. Like, sing out the black dragon, you know what I mean? Go after that. Then you'll be able to help her. So I tried, of course. I tried to do that work with her, and a lot of other people were trying to help her, and there was multiple people involved, and she's doing her part and suffering through some very intense experiences, and bad headaches that were part of her healing process. Marcus Drosso, the cover artist of Fellowship of the River, is working on this piece. It's halfway. It's an idea. For me, it was pink with little balls and then the black dragon, but it's this idea of what's on top of the genes, things that are influenced on top of the genes. So shamans take their consciousness down to the molecular level and gain access to their visions, to information related to DNA, which they call animate essence or spirits. That's what Jeremy Narby said. That's what he said that the ayahuasca told him. So here's epigenetics. I don't know if I have a laser. Do I have a laser? Here's epigenetics. In other words, you have this DNA strand, and then it's wrapped up in these proteins, and then there's all kinds of ways that the strand or the proteins can be tagged biochemically to influence now the way that code will be expressed. That's epigenetics, and that doesn't cover all of it, but that's the basic concept, that it's going to influence the way the genes are expressed, but it's not going to change the code, okay? It's on top of the genes. It's epigenetic. So I call this epigenetic software, okay? So this epigenetic software is kind of like the programming that sits over the genes that influences, if all our cells have the same DNA, my neuron cell and my muscle cell, they have the same DNA, but one of them's programmed to be a muscle cell, one of them's programmed to be a neuron, That's how it works. So it turns out that this epigenetics, there's evidence to demonstrate that it has the capacity to store emotional trauma. And in fact, it responds to emotional healing processes. So in the visions, the energies appeared to me as a little black dragon. In the physical dimension, these energies manifest as stress-related damage in the stress response system and larger PNI network, the psycho-neuro-endocrine immunologic network, what I call the emotional body. These disturbances in the emotional body can generate psychosomatic symptoms through processes like neurogenic inflammation. So there's this thing called neurogenic inflammation, which means inflammation that's being produced in your body, not from an insult or in response to some kind of irritant, but your own body is making inflammation, like autoimmune type of inflammation. So just a disturbance, for instance, in your limbic system, in your emotional processing system, can lead to a disturbance in your autonomics that would then be generating this neurogenic inflammation. An example of a migraine headache sufferer in the head, in blood vessels around the brain and the mind and all that stuff, the brain. But also there's neurogenic inflammation popping up in other diseases that we're learning about. Curiously enough, such inflammation can improve after significant emotional and spiritual healing. So that's what's crazy, these songs, the ayahuasca, all this stuff, and you're seeing decreased neurogenic inflammation, a physical process. Migraine headaches, like this idiopathic chronic cough I describe in the book, or psoriasis, Crohn's disease, are all thought to be caused by some degree of neurogenic inflammation. So I just described neurogenic inflammation generated by the system, in many cases part of a maladaptive stress response related to the body's ongoing struggle to deal with unresolved emotional trauma. So when you have neurogenic inflammation, we have ruled out all the other causes of what might be causing that. It may be time to start looking into emotional roots, because we may in fact find a solution there. Current research supports the ideas that the energies of childhood trauma live on within us as imprints in the epigenome. There's research to support this. In monkey and human studies, the biological memory of childhood maltreatment has been linked to epigenetic imprints. These lasting epigenetic imprints can be detected later in life in cells and tissues of the emotional body. Different areas of the emotional body still carry that programming. Little reference for the YouTubers. Unresolved emotional issues hang on in the emotional body as what in Shipibo terms we would describe as unhealthy energies. Shamanically, we need to clean out the spirits or the energies associated with Lisa's father's anger, her psychological trauma, and her own anger. This is Ricardo, this is my teacher, Ricardo Lamaringo. So he's always teaching us shamanic cleansing. In Shipibo, you sing soa soa, soa soa. It's like clean, 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 soa. So you're cleaning. What is the focus of the cleaning songs, Well, usually we're cleaning energies from the ancestors, from the parents, from in utero experiences, from infancy, childhood, adolescence, adult life, geographic locale, relationships, all areas that are related to epigenetics. That it's clear now. There's evidence that epigenetics is influenced by all these things. And then, of course, some paranormal stuff, but that's off topic. So where do the stories of our traumas live inside of us? How am I doing, 5 minutes? Okay. Little more YouTube references. So epigenetics, maladaptive software disease. We know that epigenetics is affected, by environmental and nutritional toxicity, and that's underneath a lot of cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, etc. Emotional toxicity damages epigenetics and is underneath these problems. And we have a lot of evidence that depression, addiction, anxiety, PTSD, big focuses of psychedelic medicine. I don't know if you noticed today, tomorrow, that they're going to talk about these. These are emotional body problems. Epigenetics is very relevant to cultural health problems stemming from our relationship to the environment, lifestyle, diet, and our relationships. So is that 5 minutes for questions or 5 minutes and still questions? Okay, I don't have time, I'm not going to get into it, but it's the same kind of thing, okay? Crohn's disease, which is just, I bring it up as a doctor. It's inflammatory bowel disease. They're bleeding. They have pain and diarrhea. It's like, how would this respond to energetic treatment? How would this respond to emotional treatment? And yet we know that he was very depressed and suicidal, and we know that inflammatory bowel disease is very comorbid with a lot of anxiety and depression. But they don't send him to the psychiatrist. They send him to the gastroenterologist. And we know that Crohn's disease actually involves disturbances in multiple regions of this emotional body I just described. And we also know that neurogenic inflammation is involved. So it's a potential case, for this kind of treatment. Multiple lines of evidence indicate that epigenetic disturbances play a significant role in the development of Crohn's disease. So just wrapping it up. We've got a stuck slide here, the old stuck slide. Ceremonial treatment, I won't get into his treatment, we'll get to questions, some more references. So it's just this, I'm saying that part of how this works, shamanic healing, is perhaps healing maladaptive epigenetic programming. I think that's true in probably psychedelic medicine across the board. It's true in a lot of spiritual healing. And so is there evidence for ways to heal epigenetics? Yes, we know antidepressants modify epigenetics. We know meditation can modify epigenetics, alter state of consciousness, affecting epigenetics. Very interesting. Psychotherapy, we know that psychotherapy can also influence epigenetics, and furthermore, it would only make sense, in fact, that shamanic healing would also work along those lines. So that's it. Thank you very much. I have a copy of the book in the... There's books out there. It's called Fellowship of the River. It has a beautiful cover. Check it out.
Questions? Please line up.
Read the book, if you're interested.
Hi, I'm Sita.
Hello,
Joe,
Sita.
thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And could you speak just a little bit to the distinction between Shipibo ayahuasca shamanism and your practice versus drinking ayahuasca in another shamanic setting that doesn't involve the one-on-one healing?
Okay, yes, thank you, Sita. So she's asking me to distinguish between Shipibo-style ayahuasca shamanism and other forms, and there are many, the Amazon is gigantic, and so they're practicing different forms of ayahuasca shamanism on top of the syncretic religions over a very large area, so there is a significant diversity, as we see in the Amazon rainforest. So one style is the Shipibo style, which Ricardo is sharing with us, and that style involves one-on-one treatment in which the shaman is actually working directly on the person and trying to do some direct kind of energetic healing with the person rather than a facilitated ceremony where we're just kind of holding space. And the difference is like a shamanic surgery type thinking, in other words, like we're going to try to make something move and change, which would be, although many people may not believe in that, but it would be a very advanced study for those interested in that. And so it's not just like, the weekend workshop, as they say. Yeah, thank you, Sita.
Do you have any evidence about... my name is Mike, and I'm just wondering if you had any evidence about ayahuasca being used for Asperger's or autism.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I personally do not. That's been an area that a lot of people have been bringing up and they're very interested in and curious about. Personally, I don't have experience with that, so I couldn't really say. But there is problems with emotional sensory integration in autism and Asperger's, and so people have been looking at it as a possibility.
Thank you. My name is Chloe, and I work with clinical herbalism, and I'm wondering if, I'm really fascinated with what you're doing, and I'm wondering if you've ever done studies on the effects on viruses, so more specifically like HPV and Epstein-Barr, things that are kind of more commonly coming up, and I don't want to get into the Lyme disease channel because that's like
Sure.
a huge topic there, but even like, post-viral meningitis care or something like
Right.
that with ayahuasca.
Or post-viral, like mono is another
Yeah.
example.
Mhm.
So there's this syndrome of people who have these viruses, viral illness that many people bounce back from, like mono or, HPV or let's say, well then we have some other stuff like Lyme's disease, which there's this component of this infection that it could be addressed a lot of different ways, but then there's this other major component of their immune response to that infection. And there is many reports of people overcoming Lyme's disease, through a process of spiritual and emotional healing, that it did benefit them, and this would be the method and the mechanisms behind upping their immune response. And so that somebody with a weakened immune response may be more susceptible to these kind of problems. So Lyme's, I have some vague, cases, people have touched on it. We had a mono that had like 2 years post-viral problem, like resolved. So it's a very interesting area to look at. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Shauna, and I was just wondering, with diseases like Crohn's disease or really anything that causes digestive upset, with the purging in ayahuasca, how do people deal with that? Is there more precautions for that?
Yeah, you have to take precautions in many, many circumstances. Like, for example, just across the board, if there's any real risk of bleeding or concern, that would be dangerous, you'd want to watch out. But this person has diarrhea like 10 times a day. And so it's really like they're already battle tested to the diarrhea. Is kind of a reality. It is true. So, you definitely do want to worry about stuff like that, but sometimes it's maybe not as big of an issue. So it should be kind of examined by somebody that has experience.
Hi, my name is Greg. I'm asking this question, Joe, to you because you come from a medical background, but also the Shipibo background.
Mm.
I come from both the ayahuasca and the ibogaine clinics and areas. And I'm gonna have a question for you about the fact that there's a lot of these research and clinics out there doing this work with no spirituality whatsoever involved in their treatments.
Right.
And my experience is a lot of what happens in those rooms, when there's no spirituality, there's no shaman, the entities that we're talking about are still on there when they go home.
Sure, and so then now we're talking about bridging the discussion, and so that's what the book is about, is like how can we start having something to talk about with each other, because if they believe it or they don't believe it, that's one thing. So it's hard to start, but at least we can start talking about energies and essences and the way things affect people through these epigenetics. It does seem to be like something we could have common ground about, like where the rubber hits the road. And so, in my experience, yes, I'm coming from a spiritual background. I realize that a lot of people, and especially the scientific community, is a little traumatized, on spiritual topics. And we're trying to be able to open up the discussion, whether we talk about the mystery, whether we talk about things beyond the comprehension of our mind, whether we're just asking people to be honest about the experience of their life being alive. That I don't have to come up here and pretend like that didn't happen to me, that I didn't sing to this lady because I'm at a science conference. That I'm going to lie to you guys. Like that would be the answer. I'm supposed to lie. And so it's like trying to get a little more truth and room for truth and respect. And so the shamans deserve respect, and the healing, the proof is in the pudding. That's what we did with these people. That's how they came out. They're glad we did it that way. And so I would just say, you might be able to get a certain way with something that way. I'm just saying you could probably get a whole lot further with it this way, and experience teaches wisdom, So why would I turn my back on multi-generational experience? I'm a doctor, you know what I mean? Like I tell people, I don't say, oh, I'm gonna do surgery today. Here, hand me the anesthesia, hand me the knife, let's figure it out. It's a little more advanced study than that, if you wanna get that kind of results. That's a complicated issue you're gonna try to address. Thank you.
Just want to add to you that, you know, this is part of the plant medicine mission, is to make this dialogue between science and spirituality. And that's why you're invited to speak here. And that's what we're
And
trying
that's
to
why
do
whatever Bea
in
tells me
this
to
track,
do.
because it's a challenge and it's part of what we're trying to advance. And as I said in the opening today, the plant medicine track is much larger than 4 years ago, and there's many more plants than we had before. So, you know, it's a path and growing study.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Thank you, Brad.
So I just wanted to probe into maybe a bit of theory that you might have to explain how when you give or take in, you know, you're giving someone a substance that changes their neurochemistry in some very profound ways. And we know that neural circuitries are changed, and you are quite aware of some of those changes. And then you're jumping to some of the very medically relevant endpoints of psychophysiologic disease. All disease is psychophysiologic, of course.
Right.
And wondering if you have some ideas about what neural circuitry changes that are elicited both through the song as well as the neurochemical input of DMT and MAOI, to then eventuate in effects on neurogenic inflammation. Obviously, there's a neural change that's then down-regulating the degree to which neurons are causing inflammation in the body. And that's central nervous system to peripheral. And so the question, what might be going on centrally to help mediate that?
Sure. Of course, I can handle that. No, I mean, just to get it quick, you know, Rael is my neuroscience guru, so he taught me a lot of things. And so as far as networks, you know, well, there's been focus on the default mode network and that part of brain networks as far as neural circuitry and changes in neural circuitry that are about changing the way we process what we feel inside and what we see in the outside world and what our little world of thoughts is. But, like, I guess the reason I come back to this, the reason I come to endpoints is because, you know, I'm a clinician, I'm telling stories about people, you know. And then the reason I come to epigenetics, for whatever it's worth, like the meditation research, you know, we could study the neural networks that change, but then ultimately my question is, as I looked at that research and saw, okay, what's changing, and, you know, neural networks are changing, and then they want to talk about what proteins are changing, different protein production as far as gene expression, and then we talk about transcription factors changing, and then we keep going back, and then the road, it's dead end at epigenetics. So then I say, like, wow, are epigenetics, like, sensitive to hyperdimensional phenomena? Like, at what point does the altered state of consciousness affect the flesh, you know? When does the neural network respond? Well, I guess according to the biochemical model, it would have to happen at the molecular level. And the evidence for molecular change in response to that seems to be at the epigenetic level. That's why I'm kind of focused on that.
We're just going to be able to take one more question, so I apologize for that.
Hi, thank you so much. In your opinion, what is the epigenetic potential for healing sensory organs and sensory input information, specifically the eyeballs?
Like, can you heal eyeballs? You mean
What I'm working on.
trying to heal your eyes? Yeah, I mean, some people report improved eyesight, you know, through ayahuasca healing, and there's probably some toxicity that builds up that maybe if you'd clear it out, it might improve, you know, so I'm not sure if they're gonna help you or not exactly. It's worth a try, yeah, it's worth a try. Some people report, I'd say you have to go and check it out.
Thank you.
Can't promise anything on that one.
Well, I want to thank Joe again and wish him luck in his integration back into American society after 6 years in Peru.